Unfortunately, car racing can bring not only triumph but also death. This was the case with famous figures like Ayrton Senna, Tom Price and Pierre Lever. Crashed sports cars, deceased spectators, and people burning alive. In this video, we will talk about all of this. And at the end of the video, we will show you that despite all the safety improvements, auto racing remains one of the deadliest sports. 24 Hours of Le Mans 1955. Let's begin with the most horrifying accident in the history of global motorsport, which occurred during the 24 Hours of Le Mans marathon on June 11, 1955. Pierre Lever had been trying to win this race since he was 38 years old, and as a veteran, he received an invitation from one of the strongest teams of that time, Mercedes. But instead of triumph, tragedy struck. On the 35th lap of the race, Pierre Lever, behind the wheel of a Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR, collided with another driver's car, Lance McLean, at a speed of 240 km per hour, sending Lever's car flying off into a protective earthen embankment acting like a ramp. It might have ended there if the car had landed back on the track or the shoulder. However, the flat car flew dangerously close to the grandstands where spectators were sitting. Upon impact, Lever's car began to disintegrate, and debris, including suspension components and the engine, flew into the crowd. Upon landing, the car's fuel tank ignited and exploded. The French driver himself perished, ejected from the vehicle. He took the lives of 86 spectators with him, and over 120 others were injured to varying degrees. In the history of global motorsport, before and after June 11, 1955, there were no accidents with such a high death toll and number of injuries. It was after this accident that safety standards began to improve annually. It may seem unbelievable, but in 1955, drivers didn't even know what seatbelts were, and this cost Lever and others their lives. Furthermore, spectators at that time could often be just a few meters away from the racing cars, hurtling by at immense speeds. The most common type of barrier in the 1950s was bales of straw or a few old tires. It's no wonder that almost every race of that era could end in tragedy, and often did. Paris-Madrid Race, 1903. In 1903, an unusual race was organized on the streets of Versailles. It had been difficult to obtain permission to hold such an event on public streets in the city for a long time. However, local residents, municipal authorities and car manufacturers were very persistent. Eventually, the race took place. It started in Versailles, where a total of 215 cars and 59 motorcycles took part in the contest. French newspapers were excited and covered the race with great enthusiasm. It was portrayed as the largest event since the invention of the automobile, and more than 100,000 people managed to get to Versailles at 2 o'clock in the morning to watch the start. The first 100 kilometers of the racetrack were crowded with spectators, and train stations were filled with people trying to get to Versailles. Spectators, unaware of the danger posed by cars racing at speeds of up to 140 kilometers per hour, stood in groups on the road. Sometimes they even crossed from one side of the road to the other, right in front of approaching cars. As a result, on the very first day of the competition, several spectators and drivers, including one of the founders of the Renault company, Marcel Renault, lost their lives. In total, half of the cars crashed or dropped out of the race, and at least 8 people were declared dead, with more than 100 injured. The French government ordered an end to this bloody farce. The race was cancelled on the day of its start. All the cars were sealed and sent home by train. The most massive accidents. If the previous competition can be called a record breaker for the number of participating cars, the next races became leaders in terms of the number of cars involved in collisions. In the 1960, during the Daytona 500 event, the largest accident in NASCAR history occurred. Part of the reason for this was that the Daytona track was much larger and faster than what the Cup participants were accustomed to. There were 68 cars on the track, and 37 of them collided at the end of the first lap. 8 drivers ended up in the hospital, but fortunately there were no fatalities. After that accident, NASCAR revised the rules and reduced the number of cars on the track to 43. In Formula 1, the record for the number of cars involved in a collision goes to the Italian Grand Prix in 1978. At the very start of the race, the starter extinguished the red lights of the traffic signal even before all the cars had lined up on the starting grid, which ultimately led to a collision involving a total of 11 cars. The Lotus, driven by Swedish racer Ronnie Peterson, crashed into a neighboring car, flew into a barrier and burst into flames. Although they managed to pull the driver out, he passed away in the hospital the next day. The race was of course stopped with a red flag. Organizers spent approximately an hour evacuating all the cars. At that time, Formula One teams were allowed to use spare cars, but still 3 drivers couldn't make it back to the restart. Imagine how frustrating it must be to lose a race without even getting to participate in it. Indy 500. Something similar happened in 1964. The Indianapolis 500 is the most popular race in North America and one of the 3 most prestigious in the world, alongside the Monaco Grand Prix and the 24 Hours of Le Mans. In that year, Dave McDonald made his debut at the Indy 500 as a Ford driver. No, it wasn't the athlete's first race. Starting with drag racing, the Californian had been behind the wheel of a sports car since 1960, raced in Corvettes, brought initial victories to each of the first 3 Cobra models, and finished 10th in the debut Daytona 500. In his 4-year racing career, he participated in 115 races, with 47 wins and 69 top 3 finishes. McDonald's career was gaining momentum. However, absolute triumph eluded him. Due to a brake system failure, Dave's car crashed into a concrete barrier. A massive cloud of black smoke caused by the burning car obscured a large section of the track and impaired the visibility of many participants. This led to a massive collision involving no fewer than 7 cars. For the first time in the history of the Indianapolis 500, the organizers had to stop the race. As a result of the terrible accident, 5 drivers suffered various injuries, and 2, including Dave McDonald himself, lost their lives. This tragic race once again highlighted the need for safety requirements to be reassessed. Fires on the track. In general, car fires on the track are not uncommon. There are at least 2 well-known cases. In 1976, during the German Grand Prix on the second lap of the race, Niki Lauda's Ferrari went off the track, hit a barrier, and bounced back onto the track, where it was hit by Brett Langer, who was following closely. Both cars caught fire and Langer managed to escape, but Lauda was trapped. Stopped drivers tried to rescue their colleague from the burning car, but it took some time. Due to severe burns to his head and face, as well as carbon monoxide poisoning, Lauda fell into a coma. Doctors doubted he would survive, but miraculously, he did. Just 6 weeks after the accident, he returned to racing and narrowly lost the championship title to James Hunt by just 1 point. In 1973, during the Dutch Grand Prix on the 8th lap of the race, on a March car driven by Roger Williamson, a tire punctured. At a speed of nearly 300 km an hour, the car crashed into a guardrail, which acted like a catapult, throwing the overturned car back onto the track. The car caught fire, and the driver was trapped in the cockpit. One of the drivers, David Purley, stopped and tried to help his colleague by turning the car over. Meanwhile, the marshals holding fire extinguishers and fearing a fuel tank explosion stood at a distance, not attempting to save Williamson. During this time, Williamson was alive, and Purley, who was attempting to extinguish the fire alone, heard him pleading for help. However, the cry soon ceased. Williamson died not from burns or other injuries, but from asphyxiation and smoke inhalation. Death by fire extinguisher. But not only the fire can be the cause of tragedy. Tom Price, the only Welsh driver to ever win in Formula One, died during the 1977 South African Grand Prix after hitting a fire marshal who was crossing the track with a fire extinguisher. Here's what happened. Another driver's car caught fire, and 2 firefighters with fire extinguishers attempted to approach the track to extinguish the fire without proper coordination. Tom Price struck one of them since the race was not stopped, and the cars were moving at high speeds. The 19-year-old firefighter died instantly from the impact, and the fire extinguisher he was carrying hit Price directly in the head, killing him. Price's car, with the lifeless driver behind the wheel, continued down the track and came to a stop after crashing into the entrance gates for emergency vehicles. Group B rally cars. Let's tell you a bit about Group B rally cars. This was perhaps the most extreme phenomenon in the history of racing. Can you imagine cars weighing 900 kilograms, accelerating to 100 kilometers per hour in just 2 seconds on gravel? Created in 1982, Group B significantly boosted the popularity of rallying, marked the beginning of Audi's major victories in motorsport, and served as the pinnacle of the racing careers of some talented drivers. However, it couldn't last long by definition. The first major tragedy of Group B occurred during the 1986 Portugal Rally. In one of the turns, an inexperienced driver named Joaquim Santos, participating in a car with such power for the first time, lost control and crashed into a crowd of spectators. At least 3 people died and 10 others suffered severe injuries. However, the main reason for the complete elimination of Group B was a horrific incident that happened shortly after Santos' accident in the same year, 1986. One of the most talented rally drivers of his time, Henri Toivonen, had mentioned in interviews that the Lancia Delta S4 was too fast to be safe. Indeed, in terms of its characteristics, the Delta S4 was the fastest car among the fastest cars on the planet at that time, making a severe accident on narrow mountain roads without barriers just a matter of time. And that's exactly what happened. There are no recordings of that section of the stage, but according to one version, the driver lost control. As a result, the car veered off the road at a turn, crashed into a tree, and burst into flames. Perhaps the crew died from the impact, but the fire burned for another 20 minutes until rescuers found the car. If this race were held today, if the accident had occurred on a well-equipped and populated road section, the fire would have been extinguished in seconds. However, in those days, the track infrastructure left much to be desired, and the organizers were simply not prepared for such situations, which is why what happened, happened. The deaths of Toivonen and his co-driver Cresto led to an immediate ban on the dangerous Group B cars for both drivers and spectators. The death of a 3-time champion. Brazilian Ayrton Senna, a 3-time Formula One world champion, participated in a race on May 1, 1994. The day before the race during qualifying, the Austrian driver Roland Ratzenberger died. However, the race was not cancelled, as it was not deemed sufficient reason to do so, so the competition began. Already on the second lap, due to a collision between 2 other drivers, it became necessary to send out a safety car that would slow down the races, allowing track crews to clear debris from the track. The race resumed on the 6th lap, but not on the 7th. Ayrton Senna's car, at full speed, flew off the track, crashing into the barriers. The race was halted, and Senna's lifeless body, showing no signs of life, was transported to the hospital by helicopter. There, it was determined that Senna's brain was already dead, and there was no chance of recovery from the coma. The decision was made to disconnect him from life support. Since then, this has been the most famous accident in motorsport. It remains so also because to this day there are too many unknowns surrounding the incident. The main mystery is the cause of the accident. According to one version, overheated tires failed. According to another, the car's control systems malfunctioned. And according to a third, the driver succumbed to the physical stresses and blacked out. It's also unknown when exactly Senna died. On the track, en route to the hospital, or at the hospital. Everyone agrees on one thing though, the cause of death, which resulted from an impact to the head by a suspension component. Of course, after this incident, safety requirements were once again tightened. Moreover, every car was now required to undergo crash tests before racing. However, it seems that these measures are still insufficient to ensure complete safety in these sporting events. The 2014 Japanese Grand Prix took place under heavy rain. On the 42nd lap of the race, driver Adrian Sutil crashed. On the 43rd lap, Jules Bianchi lost control and collided with another car near the forklift that was evacuating Sutil's car. The commission determined that at the moment of the collision between a 700-kilogram Formula One car and a 6.5-ton crane, the Formula One car was traveling at a speed of 126 km per hour. The FIA called fundamentally incorrect the assertion by some experts that such an accident could leave room for a positive outcome. According to some reports, the French driver was distracted and didn't notice the obstacle ahead. According to others, he simultaneously pressed the gas and brake pedals to activate the fail-safe system, which reduces engine revs. However, due to the design features of the Marussia car, the system did not work. Some experts even believe that the tragedy was caused by the wet track and the dark time of the day. The truth may never be known. What is clear, though, is that auto racing is still a deadly sport despite all the measures taken. After all, 9 months after Bianchi's accident, he died in a hospital in France from injuries sustained during the competition. Auto racing is indeed a dangerous sport. Throughout the history of competitions in this discipline, there have been many terrible accidents. We've only covered some of the most memorable ones. Thank you for watching.